I think about and talk about a lot is how many times are the, quote, church people in the way of Jesus? Welcome to the Far More Podcast. Hey, Liz.
Hey, Jason.
How are you?
I'm good. I'm good.
Why did you sigh on the front end of I'm good?
I don't know.
You went, I'm good.
I think I just needed a deep breath.
Okay.
I think that's all that was behind
Nothing
that one. You
to-
said something dragging you to Jesus. And
Yeah.
that made me think of one of the other things I wanted to talk to you about, which is I think it's one of your favorite passages is Mark 2, where
Yes.
the four men take this poor paralyzed man who just wants to see Jesus because he knows that Jesus can heal him.
Do we know that?
Do we know what?
That he wants to see Jesus because he knows Jesus can heal
Well,
him.
I think I asked you that in a previous episode, and I don't know that you necessarily had an answer for me.
What I said is we don't know the relationship of the four men with the guy.
True.
What we know is the men knew they needed to get this person to Jesus. I don't know what the paralyzed man knew.
Interesting.
I think the paralyzed man, and there's not a lot of context on the front end of Mark 2. So those Bible scholars, you comment, please help me out on this.
If we have any out there.
Bring it. You know, he knew of his obvious brokenness. I think that's where we start.
Paralyzed man.
The paralyzed man. He knew he was paralyzed.
Well, yeah, right.
He knew his obvious brokenness.
Right.
Right? And he wanted to be healed of that. And there's four men that come along and they say, we know if we can get you to Jesus, he can heal you. He can heal you. And so they're on the way to see Jesus, who's teaching in this house in Capernaum. They get there. This place is packed out, right? Because Jesus always draws a crowd. You know, there's
Either for better or for worse.
Right. And so, you know, the folks on the inside are leaned into Jesus' teaching. There's folks on the outside, scribes and Pharisees, probably going, what's he doing? Let's see if we can catch him on something, right? They get there. They can't get him to Jesus through the front door, right? And one of the things that I think about and talk about a lot is how many times are the, quote, church people in the way of Jesus? When you desperately trying to get someone that's broken that you know, man, if we can get this person to Jesus, their life's going to change. And you walk through and you bump into church people.
You're crowded out.
You can't get there, right? Something happens and church people are in the way of Jesus. That's a heavy and that's a different conversation. But these four guys, they desperately knew, let's get this guy there. They go on the roof of this house.
They were determined.
They were determined.
Where there is a will.
They were determined on their mission and their objective to get this man to Jesus. They get on the roof, and then think about roofs back then.
Oh, mud?
Right. They're not pulling off shingles. They're digging through straw and mud and probably manure.
Ugh, yeah, that's...
And that mental picture for me is, if you are trying to get someone that's broken to Jesus, you're going to get your hands dirty. And you're going to have to dig through some crap in their life.
Yeah.
Right? But you got to be so committed to the journey and the mission of, I know I'm going to get my hands dirty. I know I'm going to be sweating. I know my back's going to be sore from carrying this person. But I so believe if I can get this man to Jesus, his life will be changed.
Right.
Right? So they lower him down. And then, because Jesus kind of like, I guess, looks at the scene is how I vision it. And I'm like, there's these four guys, there's this man. And the first thing he does, he doesn't immediately heal his obvious brokenness, right? He doesn't necessarily say, get up and walk first. No. The first thing he does, he says, your sins are forgiven, right? Because the four guys and maybe the man saw the obvious brokenness.
Right.
Jesus saw the real brokenness and the real problem. And he says, we're going here first. This is the important thing.
Right.
And so often I think we don't understand the important thing or the real brokenness. We're focusing on this thing. But when we get to Jesus, Jesus goes, here's the real issue.
Right.
Right. And it took me years to understand what Jesus really said in that moment. He looked around and he says, because of their faith, right? The four guys that brought him there, because of their faith,
you are healed.
Your sins are forgiven.
Oh,
right.
Right.
And so not only were they willing to get somebody to Jesus, but Jesus said, because of your faith, not what the man's faith in Jesus. I always think because of my faith, X, Y, and Z, is because of the people that brought him to Jesus. Because of their faith, your sin is forgiven. And do we have that kind of faith? One, to bring someone to Jesus? Are people not being saved because we don't have that level of faith? I don't know. And it makes me just think about, if I'm not sweating, my back's not hurting, if I'm not digging through crap, my hands aren't dirty, and if my faith isn't strong enough to know I have to do all this to help somebody not be broken and get them to Jesus, am I living out what we're supposed to do as Christ followers?
Whew, that's a lot.
It's a lot. And I've read this passage, I don't know, it feels like 100 times.
So many times, yes.
And every time I'm just like, is this the picture of what we're supposed to do as men and what following Christ really looks like in terms of bringing someone to Jesus? And Jesus saves them because of our faith and our belief that, man, if I just get you there, if I drag you there, if I claw through the mud and the manure with you, I know Jesus will save you.
I wonder if they did have to drag. Obviously, they had to carry him because he was paralyzed. I get that. I'm sort of talking almost mentally. Did they have to drag him there? Because like you said, we're not given much context on the paralyzed man's mental state, his mental capacity, how he was feeling about the situation. So I am curious if he was like, y'all, I don't want to go. And they're like, no, you just don't understand.
Yeah.
You just don't get it. And I think that's kind of what you're saying. That's the attitude we need to have. You just don't understand. If you could just,
That's right.
if you just knew what I knew, if you knew what Jesus was capable of doing, you would come. So I'm just going to drag you whether you want to go or not. So are we saying that maybe that's how we're supposed to be?
What I'm saying, and when I've looked at Mark, is I always go, where are you in the story? Are you the person sitting on the floor next to Jesus soaking it all in? Is that you? You've been a Christian your whole life and you're soaking it in, right? That's what you're doing. Are you someone that's more skeptical? You're on the outside kind of looking in going, what is this thing really about? Mm-hmm. Or are you that casual Christian that's kind of on the outside going, yeah, I want to be close, but not too close, right? Or are you this champion of the faith that's dragging someone to Jesus,
right?
That's doing all it takes? Or are you that person that needs to be dragged? That's the hardest one for me, is raising my hand and saying, you know what? I need friends. I need some men that are willing to drag me to Jesus. That's always been the hardest one for me, right?
Why?
Because that's just admitting such vulnerability and such weakness, and I need other strong people to get. That's just hard for me. I want to be the guy that's sweating, carrying somebody to Jesus. Or I want to be the person sitting next to Jesus, soaking in the worship music, praising, hands up, right? Just soaking that in, feeling like I feel good about getting this message, right? That's comfortable, right? It's great, but it's also...
But it's still necessary.
I'm not saying it's
to
not
be
necessary.
poured into.
But it's not the end game.
No,
right?
It's not.
You get fed
so that you can feed others.
So that you can go drag somebody to Jesus. Am I staying there?
Yeah.
Am I staying there in that moment? And then when I'm going to work on Monday, everything flips.
Yeah.
Right? That happens almost every week for me. I'm soaking in on Sunday. I'm worshiping. I'm like, man, I needed this. Paul constantly tells us,
die to self.
Die to self. Die to self. We literally have to cancel ourselves.
That's for another podcast.
That's
too.
for another podcast.
Oh boy, that's a big one.
But that's what we're called to do. So,
join us on this journey. We're glad you're here. Wherever you're listening or watching, give us a like. Drop a review, because I've heard if people give you a positive review, you get bumped up in all the special like algorithms or whatever all that techie stuff is.
But I think it needs to be a good review, not just a review.
Yes. A 5-star or however many stars you can give us. Give them all of them.
If you're wanting to give us a 1-star, I'd rather just comment. Will you comment instead?
Yeah. Don't give us a 1-star review. That's not nice. Why would somebody give us a 1-star review? That's not nice. People need to be kind. Show
See my
kindness.
previous statement. That's not the starting place.
Oh boy. So hit that like button, subscribe wherever you listen to your podcast or watch your podcast, and we'll see you next time.
See ya.